What cars do the wealthy drive? Well, I think if you ask most people on the street, they would come up with things like Rolls Royces or Bentleys or Ferraris or Lamborghinis. But the fact is, the answer is much, much more pedestrian than that. In fact, they probably drive what you and I drive. So, welcome back to All Cars, y'all. This is John, and a lot of this is inspired, I will admit, by the book The Millionaire Next Door. If you've never read it, I strongly recommend it. Researchers did studies of the wealthy over years, and my version is from 1998. The book was released in 96. So some of the numbers in here are a little out of date when they talk about a luxury car being $37,000, for example. But one of the things they identify in here is one of the basic questions is, what is wealthy or what is rich? Well, the federal government says that if you make more than $250,000 a year, you're rich. I think a lot of people would disagree with that and don't feel that way. But what they identified in this book is that you have two general classifications of people who are high income earners. So that you've got earned income, and then you've got actual wealth, how much investments you have. And the two categories they found were underachievers of wealth and prodigious accumulators of wealth. I may get those names slightly wrong, but the idea is that the prodigious accumulators of wealth live below their means and save or invest a ton of money, whether it's the stock market or real estate or farmland or whatever it happens to be. The underaccumulators, they have a very high income, but because they've got the late model cars and the big house and the right neighborhood with designer clothes, and their kids go to private schools and everything else, they're broke. They literally have no path to retirement to replace their current income because they're living almost paycheck to paycheck, just at a very high level. So one chapter in here is they took a look at the buying habits of the wealthy for automobiles. And it's super, super impactful because one of my favorite quotes in the entire book. So they had done a meeting with a series of millionaires, 10 millionaires as I recall, and as the millionaires were leaving and they were looking out into the parking lot, one of them made this quote: "These people are not into status. They buy automobiles by the pound." And that's a really, really important question. Now, one of the things that came out of here is that only about 20 some odd percent bought new year cars, current cars. The rest of them, fully 22, almost a quarter of them bought a year off. So they're buying used to miss some of that depreciation. And the rest of them were spread out over keeping things that were much older. What's really fascinating is to look at the brands they actually buy. So what do the wealthy drive? Well, the fact of the matter is that 9.4% of them, so nearly 10%, bought Fords. Most popular at the time, F-150 pickups and the Ford Explorer. Next would be Cadillac at 8.8%, so a more luxury brand. And then third would be Lincoln at 7.8%. So nearly, what is that, 17.5% of the wealthy were buying Ford products. Then you've got a three-way tie with Jeep, Lexus, and Mercedes at 6.4%. Oldsmobile, that's how old the book is, at 6%, and Chevy at 5.6%. And then you ended up with Toyota, Buick, and a tie for Nissan and Volvo. Now, of course, this is kind of out of date. They did mention Oldsmobile there. But the lesson is, for people who have a very high level of wealth, they're not buying the most expensive cars. The very high level of wealth people, very high level of income people, they don't need to show their wealth. They buy reasonable, rational, middle of the road cars. Now, they might be nice cars. They might be at the top of the line, but they're not buying the most expensive thing they possibly can. Well, moving through the decades, in 2011, there was a Forbes article addressing this very thing. They got together with Experian and asked them to mine through their data and say, what do the wealthy drive? Now, I've not been able to find the Experian study only the Forbes article and other articles that reference the Forbes article. But what's really fascinating is that of the top 10 cars, not just brands, but cars that the wealthy bought for 2011 here, Mercedes E-Class, the Lexus RX, the BMW 5 Series, the BMW 3 Series, 3 Hondas, one of which was the Odyssey, the minivan, one Toyota, it was the Prius, 1 Acura, and 1 VW, which I believe was the Jetta. Now, you would likely say, oh, okay, hold on a minute here. They're still buying Mercedes and BMW. That's true. But did you notice they're not buying the top? Now, I suspect between 2011 and today that those might be replaced with, like the Lexus RX, they might be replaced with like the BMW X5 or something like that. But the point is, they aren't buying the S-Class or a Maybach or a 7 Series. They're buying the E-Class and the 5 and the BMW 3. Cars that admittedly for someone who's making $500,000 a year, a 3 Series is like buying a Honda Civic to the rest of us. So they're not buying the absolute maximum of what they can afford. And this study does not address if those were brand new or if they were buying them slightly used. Looking at the rest of it, where Lexus is more of a premium brand than truly a luxury brand, 3 Hondas, 1 Toyota, and 1 Volkswagen. Everyday, pedestrian, middle-class cars, something to get them from point A to point B. Now, I suspect if they're buying a Honda Accord, for example, they're getting the EX with leather, not the LX like I drive. But the point is, they're not buying Alfa Romeos, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Jaguars, things like that. They're buying quality and perceived value. Well, of course, there is another more recent from 2023. Dave Ramsey tweeted the top brands that were the choices of the wealthy. And it's an interesting read. Number 1 is Toyota. Number 2 is Honda. 3 is Ford. And 4th is Lexus. So consider that for a second. They're not only buying less than they can afford, they're buying middle of the road, they're buying middle class. And in 30 years, Ford is still one of the top brands that high income earners or the wealthy are choosing. Next is Lexus, Subaru, BMW, Acura, Hyundai, Lincoln, and Buick. So Lincoln still makes it into the top 10 as well. So Ford and Lincoln have survived 30 some odd years because I believe they represent a solid value for people. Buick making it, I'm glad to see that. And Hyundai having worked its way up over the decades to being another largely analogous to Honda and Toyota imported brand that offers good value for the money. So what's the takeaway here? Well, the perception of what the wealthy drive in our society is often driven by celebrities, athletes, entertainers, people who get the Bentley Continentals and things like that. But that's not actually true. Those people and people who inherit their money are a small percentage of the wealthy in America. The vast majority of the wealthy in America, as they say in this book multiple times, tend to be, well, high income earners, lawyers and doctors or architects and things like that save a ton of money, or they're small business owners. And they mention several times in this book, people who own, say, a small manufacturing business. You wouldn't expect them, but they're actually making quite a bit of money and saving it, investing it. And they tend to buy value. They tend to recognize the value of a dollar, whereas people who inherit it, or an athlete or an entertainer who suddenly gets their big movie deal, doesn't mean quite as much. They tend to splurge, or they tend to need to show off on social media. Now, as I'd like to end with a personal note that one of the wealthiest men I have ever personally known and had a chance to talk to, and repeatedly, had a nice house. And you know what? He had a Ferrari. He kept it parked. And on a day-by-day basis, He drove a Mercedes E-Class station wagon, and it wasn't a new one. I think it was about 5 years old when I knew him. And that is an example of what the wealthy drive. They buy value even if it's a slightly nicer brand. The rest of them, they buy the same Toyota and Honda that all of us do. Thanks for being here and for spending a few minutes with me, y'all.